Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makul with you at PTV World. Wishing you all a happy Eid Mubarak and talking about the economic situation of the country today as we expect the budget announcements coming in tomorrow. And of course, this is a very important time for Pakistan and a very, very integral matter annually when we speak about what is going on. This, of course, holds a lot of importance in terms of looking back at the previous fiscal year and moving ahead into the next one. And this is, of course, also important in terms of how the government has performed with reference to the IMF's bailout package, and then of course key indicators whether or not they're showing a positive trajectory and what is needed and what sort of budget allocations or cuts will be made tomorrow. So a lot of course is expected from different sectors. We've also seen the economic survey of Pakistan also being unveiled by the finance minister earlier today, where of course a number of sectors have shown growth and improvement, resilience, and then we see others in which of course key challenges remain. So we're going to be taking a look at what that means in terms of the overall picture of the economy of Pakistan today and what can be expected tomorrow in terms of what the country and the government plans to allocate for the budget, and then of course the way that that's going to impact the economy, the business community, and of course the public at large. So that's going to be the focus of our show today. For this and more, as always in the studios, I've been joined by analyst Farooq Patafi and Raja Faisal, and we will soon be joined by Executive Director Prime, Mr. Ali Salman. But before we go towards Mr. Ali, Farooq, I'd like to start with you in terms of your take on what the economic survey has shown us and revealed to us in terms of where we stand and most likely sectors in which the government will of course be presenting the budget tomorrow.
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. Once again, Eid Mubarak to you and the audience also. I think that the greatest story at this moment is of primary surplus because we know that economy was shrinking last time we checked, and now there is growth, about 2.6%. That is good news. Also, the fact that the country has actually reversed the external payment situation. It has gone from $1.3 billion deficit to 1.9 billion surplus, and that is essentially due to the increase in 33 record increase in remittances year on year in the past 33 years. So that is very impressive. Of course, when you talk about various sectors, agriculture seems to struggle. There are highs and lows. Similarly, when you talk about manufacturing, in manufacturing also and mining, we have seen some struggles. But remember that the kind of odds that this country had to go through. Just to remember that even in this month, the previous month, Sana, we saw quite a huge shock to the country, right? A country was trying to invade us. Similarly, our economic situation saw many crises, but the great thing is that Pakistan has managed to establish a relationship of trust with IMF. And one thing that actually stood out today when the finance minister was presenting the survey was that, and that was news to me, that India actually tried that the recent board meeting of IMF that approved the recent tranche should not take place. So with that kind of animus quite visible, I think we have done great.
Right. Let us also welcome in the debate Dr. Ali Salman, who's joined us online. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for joining us and being a part of the debate. And I'd like your take on what insights have you drawn from the economic survey and what can be expected tomorrow. Dr. Ali, can you hear me?
Thank you, Sana,
yes, go ahead,
for
please.
having me in your program.
My pleasure.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
I would like to comment on the economic survey. The headline of the economic survey, if I would like to summarize, is that government has at least achieved and been successful in stabilization of the economy, as it has shown a control and a significant reduction in the fiscal deficit. And on the other hand, it has also achieved a current account surplus. So this is a big milestone for a government or for an economy which was on the brink of default not too long ago. And from that point onward, I think government has managed the macroeconomic accounts quite well. On the other hand, the economic growth numbers are disappointing. Whether we talk about agriculture growth rate, large scale manufacturing growth rate, or even services growth rate, these numbers are not encouraging. And in fact, the troubling part is that these are not complete numbers. And if you look at the average number of previous of the 3 quarters which are actually reported in the economic survey, the average would be just 1.7% and not 2.68%. So that means that while the stabilization has been achieved, which is a remarkable achievement, the policies for economic growth are not there, and without which then we cannot have sustainable sources of not just for running our government, but also sustainable economic growth for creation of jobs, private sector mobilization. And if you look at how, for instance, the exchange rate has been stabilized, it's also a plus factor. But then also it has, we've also seen attempt to manage the imports, which has helped in the stabilization of exchange rate. The other thing I notice is that monetary policy has been, I think, quite professionally run in last couple of years, and it has helped to curtail at least the demand side of inflation. And certainly the state bank has been successful in achieving its long-term inflation target, which is between 5 to 7%. It is less than 5% headline inflation. So these are certainly, I think, good signs. But as I said, the economic growth, which depends, which is indicated by higher level of savings and higher levels of investment in the private sector, or higher level of foreign investment in the country, is yet to be seen. And we hope that as we come out from these milestones of stabilization and move to more fundamental reforms, and opening of the economy, it can move to actually really sustainable economic growth.
Right, absolutely. And Faisal, I want your take on this as well, because while we talk about so many of these factors and the way that they impact the economy, there's of course so much more in terms of the people involved, the ministry and the government and the state elements, and all of them of course also have to come together for any of this to be successful. So what are your takes on what can possibly be expected from this particular government tomorrow in the ways that they have run the past fiscal year?
Yes, and obviously if we look at this particular year, this was a little better year from the previous two. Reason being, we shouldn't be forgetting that when government took the reins of the country, especially the economic sector, it was hit at that time, and of course the stabilization of the economy, it was going on. When we talk about IMF program, of course Pakistan was heading towards it. There were hurdles hurdle after hurdles, and then earlier of course Farooq has mentioned the India factor. Of course we know that previously they have been easily of course tackling around with Pakistan just to squeeze more and more. Of course they have been pressurizing IMF, and of course that pressure could be seen in terms that previous 2 years, 2 years before this particular fiscal year, of course Pakistan had many challenges. So far, of course, where we see Pakistan's economy right now, I mean, I am satisfied with it. Reason being, it is on the track where we can say that it has come out of all of the dangers, and especially a country that was imposed with a war in recent, obviously last month. that kind of country, and coming out of that month as well, coming out very clean out of it. And even if we look at our adversary, India is facing troubles in terms of their economy, because their indicators, they are going negative since then. Of course, Pakistan's indicator, they are going positive since then. And of course, the positive impact on economy was of Pakistan successfully getting the IMF program. And then of course, overall situation is calmed down now. And when we talk about inflation, Sana, inflation is something, of course, it had a control. Of course, government is trying to control it, and to some extent it has been controlled.
It
We should-
hasn't really controlled.
yeah, and
It's come down really.
yeah, and I think when inflation is controlled, that's when people, of course, they run the economy in terms that the money circulates more and more. People have more trust in the economy, and people who want to save just for the rainy day, they believe that rainy days are over, and of course they can go around and shop around, and of course they can expand their budgets as well. Overall, of course, if we look at that confidence, that confidence is there on the buyers. And the only problem which I see, that the this year, of course, we are seeing that due to the weather and certain other impacts, of course our crops, they would be seeing a challenge. And I think this time around, the equilibrium between importing the raw material, that might disturb a bit, but at the same time we can say that eventually when exports would expand, then that would be covered. Where we are standing right now, it's all good. We just need to, as Dr. Ali has rightly pointed out, that the planning for the next year, the coming year, I think that would be pivotal. And that planning, of course, would include the priorities of Pakistan and the priorities of different sectors of Pakistan as well. And I think individually, all of the provinces, if they are heading towards the next fiscal year with a positive sort of persona, of course we can say that things can be adjusted really well in coming year.
Right. Dr. Ali, I also want your take on when Faisal was, of course, mentioning the people and what they want from the government, and what are they looking at. And I want your understanding then on how this budget is going to be relevant for the general public to understand, and what their expectations will be, and what sort of key sectors are they looking at, such as health and education, that keep coming up, also very important aspects to actually changing the lives of the people and having an impact. Are we seeing or expecting anything there?
And Dr. Saab, a follow-up to what you said earlier regarding growth numbers. You mentioned that these numbers are of 3 quarters. So it is usually, but this is how things are supposed to be. Every year when we get economic survey, there are 3 quarters, and the 4th one is projection. But didn't the finance minister very clearly say that he wanted to ensure that we have this leapfrogging of economic growth, because Pakistan has this vicious cycle of boom and bust. So Pakistan should not be dragged back into it.
Yeah, I think let me just address the question first raised by Sana, and that is about the relief which we often associate with every budget. So I would like to make, I think, a realistic expectation here. First of all, budget is not an instrument for providing a relief. Budget is essentially a policy, a document, or a direction where the government is trying to manage its books. It's not the entire economy. It's not people's economy. It's government's economy. And essentially, what we expect from the government is to manage the books so that it has you know, it has to tax the least number of people and distribute the tax to a wider number of segments. In terms of rates, it should be low. It should be, in terms of base, it should be very broad. In terms of public expenditure, in terms of managing state-owned enterprises, government departments, and any of these non-productive expenditures, those needs to be brought down. Income tax slabs, income tax rates, especially on the salaried class, were raised significantly in the last budget, and finance minister has acknowledged it a number of times. So one relief which I would expect the government to provide is to offer some reduction within these slabs, and then also increase the lower threshold, so that at least 1 million rupees of salary on an annual basis can be exempted from tax. However, if the relief is meant to be in terms of prices, price reductions, price controls, I'm afraid that now that is a thing of a past, because such artificial measure has costed our economy. These subsidies, these inefficient allocation of resources have actually not benefited the poor people. They have benefited the richer segment of the society. So certainly, I think these reliefs, also in terms of we have tax exemptions. Tax exemptions over the years have not come down; they have increased. They have been increasing. So it means that segments of the taxpayers are still, enjoying exemption from tax payment. And a relief could be that these also should be brought into the tax net, so that the burden on the salaried class would be reduced. So I think these are important measures through which the government can offer a real relief, instead of offering any artificial measures such as price control or subsidies, which tend to be counterproductive. And a last point on this is that we acknowledge the role of social spending, we acknowledge the role of social protection. Basic income support has been program has been there, and it has consistently been supported by all the governments. It is very interesting to see that governments of all political background in last 15 years or so have continued to invest more in this social protection measure, which is not a poverty alleviation tool, but it's an income support measure. It's a measure to manage people economic transition, and I think the government has done well in the overall in terms of distribution. So these are some relief measures which government can offer.
And
Absolutely. And Farooq's question. Yes.
regarding the conservative growth strategies, your take on that?
So yeah, so I think Farooq, my view is that yes, government is aware that when we in the current growth structure, when the government tries to grow beyond, let's say, 4%, then it causes problem in terms of the current account stability, and then our import numbers go up, and this is a cycle in which we are set in. But that does not mean that we stop investing in commodity producing sector. For instance, the private sector. It all depends on the growth, on the sources of growth. If the growth is being financed through public money or through more deficit financing, then it's a problem. But if the growth is coming from the private sector investment, from the industries, from more investment in agriculture, for instance, then it's not a problem, because such growth actually drives up the production, keeps the prices in check, also drives up the profit, drives up the productivity, and increases the job market. So that is a welcome growth that we ought to see, because that is the only way we can sustain such a large number of young people and our population. So I'm aware that the government is conservative in terms when it comes to economic growth strategy, but I'm also would like to highlight that it needs to go aggressive on encouraging the private sector to invest. You see, we have capital available in the country. We have resources available in the country. Why, last year or so, we have witnessed the outflow of 12 to 13 billion dollars in real estate in other countries, and why we have not been able to bring or create economic conditions or business environment within the country. Why we have lost, why so many factories have closed down in last 1 year. So while we acknowledge the progress made on the macro front, but on the business front, we ought to also realize these challenges.
Yeah,
Right.
Dr. Ali, it's always very interesting talking about the economic circle and how, of course, the macro and micro economic hubs. What happens is, of course, whenever there are, as we were talking about the increase in the taxes, and it is seen that whenever the taxes are increased on the industrial sector and the business sector, it's the people who, of course, bear all of the taxes in terms that the prices go high, and eventually, of course, the salaried class it gets taxed so that nobody bullies in the market to the normal people. And obviously, if the industrial sector that gets taxed, eventually people are going to pay that tax because the prices go very high. Is there any mechanism which can ensure that the government actually imposes the sort of sanctions on all of these industries that actually put extra prices or extra price tags on their products? Or can we say that that macro industrial hubs they need to be increased in terms that the more and more private sectors they can be involved in it, so that eventually there are more products in the market and there is more competition between the industries rather than competition between the people to buy the products? There should be enough products so that the price control can be ensured.
You see, Faisal, the economics have some certain universal features and certain universal laws, and we can't bend the way economics work. So when you impose a taxation,
Yes, please go ahead.
especially when like Pakistan. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
yes, we
can.
can.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can,
Yes.
Dr. Ali.
Sorry. So when you impose higher level of taxation, normally it's a pass-through item. Businesses pass these taxes on to the costs in the prices, which that consumers have to pay. You're absolutely right that these higher level of taxes also a cause of inflation. In fact, certain segments in the industry, especially in the manufacturing sector, in the textile sector, have mentioned that because of the low turnover, because of the low turnover margins in terms of their sales, the effective rates of taxation, when we include all kind of taxation, have gone up something like 70% to about 100% in some cases, which is mind-boggling. So what happens that the formal sector, the large sector, large companies then try to evade the taxes, and when the taxes are built in the prices, then obviously the result is inflation. So the way out is to remove certain taxes, like super tax needs to be removed. I think there was a time when super tax that needs to go away immediately. Yes, there is a corporate tax of 29%, which all companies needs to pay. But then we don't need, surcharge on income tax. For instance, now individuals earning a certain is above a certain level also also have to pay super tax. So it means that those individuals who are paying high, salaries, they do not have incentive to work here, and they may, migrate. So this applies to companies as well. So I think government needs to make sure that not only that this extra taxes like super tax or a CBT tax, the taxes on the foreign assets needs to be done away with, but also the tax rates across industrial activity or across economic activity for that matter needs to be equated. There was an attempt last year, and I think that was the right direction that when the government brought the export sector in the normal tax regime, but then they also did not lift the turnover tax, which is called the minimum tax. At that time, it was final tax. Then it was renamed as minimum tax. So these exporters have to pay both a turnover tax as a minimum tax and an income tax on their assessment of after 1 year. So twice. And then the all kind of refunds and advances and all these complications. I think this adds this sucks up the working capital, the liquidity in the private sector, and this makes doing business very difficult in the country. And government has to show resolve through the budget. And I'm really hoping that some of these ideas are reflected in the budget which the finance minister is going to present tomorrow.
Farooq, I want your take on this, because when we talk about these changes, it seems simple enough in terms of what is required and what is needed, and what, even if we just talk about tax reforms, why is it that it hasn't happened, or it's not something that we see then?
Thank you, Sana. I'm really glad that Dr. Salman actually covered so much regarding taxes, this thicket of taxes that you keep on seeing, and there seems to be this complicated kind of masonry that is involved. On one side, you have that. On the other side, the similar kind of thicket of SROs that provide the kind of exemptions that we have witnessed, right? So it is quite fascinating to see a post-colonial state with its post-colonial bureaucracy working tirelessly to actually make it another episode of Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. But apart from that, when you look at all these concerns, of course, they are going to be rationalized. So far, what we have seen is that indirect taxes have increased, or their revenue stream has increased. But when it comes to direct taxes, the collection target was missed. And even though we revised it, right? And that would be because of so many people who have found ways to, outsmart the system, or then outmuscle the system. For example, retailers were one example. We started with so much hope, and I kept on reminding you that since for the past 20 years, since I've been actually covering this, every year we have heard about this ambition of bringing them into tax net. And of course, when it comes to small shops, there is tendency to bring a lot of people into documentation, fold. But there are umpteen big businesses, even in Islamabad. Go to the markets here, and you will not get any kind of proper receipt when it comes to, any kind of receipt that can be actually sent to FBR. So there are exemptions, and there are people who keep on manipulating the system. So we'll have to fix that. I hope in coming days we do. There are 2 or 3 things that are important. Number one, when it comes to our finance team, I've seen that this team, A, knows what it is doing. B, they are also very conscientious when it comes to their commitment. Unfortunately, there are things that haven't been straightened out. For example, when you talk about SOEs, and by the way, every time I actually talk about SOEs, somebody comes and reminds me that you are sitting in PTV, right? And I have to actually tell them that after what happened on May 10th, And the way India was actually using propaganda to practically invade Pakistan, after that, what we have done, we have earned our laurels and we have proven that we are the first line of defense when it comes to propaganda. Actually, given that there are so many pressures, and I know that balancing books becomes a serious issue, I think IMF should be told that this organization is important to keep, and there should be less pressure because they keep on trying to actually squeeze us further. I don't know whether it is because of any innate desire to censor us or something, but that has been happening for quite some time. Please don't do that, right? But SOE's finance minister was very straight about that. That 1 trillion rupees that went here could have gone elsewhere, right? Similarly, we are trying to actually reform pensions. But then when you talk about the PSDP numbers, Sana, they are always very impressive. But what happens at the end of the term? Usually in the final days, most of the monies that are sent at the local level, they are either lapsing, and because of that they keep on throwing that money away, because then the fear is next time they will be given lesser money, that amount will be deducted from whatever they were going to get, or otherwise the kind of projects that we get are full of corruption. So there has to be, when you talk about PSDP, when you talk about ADP, all these projects need to be very, very, transparent. Remember that there was an IMF report that said something very important. It said that it takes a usual project in Pakistan 12 and a half years to actually come to its culmination or conclusion. Just imagine the kind of wastage and the kind of time waste that we are, throwing in because of inefficiency. So we need restructuring of bureaucracy also. At least get people who understand what to do at the right place, right? And that is a concern that we unfortunately seem to be missing every year. I hope in coming days we can fix it. Tomorrow I hope to see new commitment regarding one commitment that was made today was about doing away with circular debt. Remember that you keep on talking about relief, all taxes, this Mangai also, they hit us as well because we are salaried people also. But whatever compromises or sacrifices you are making today are going to benefit you tomorrow. So remember that there is the zero-sum game. If you want early harvest today, you are not going to get the kind of profit that you need tomorrow. So it is important to actually keep your mind, your eye on the ball and ensure that you are moving in that right direction.
Right. Dr. Ali, I also want your take on this, because while we talk about, of course, the good measures that we've seen result in the positive indicators in the past fiscal year, I also want your take when we talk about the IMF and the conditionalities or the situation that Pakistan is in it, for the general public to understand how much margin or room does the government really have when it comes to playing out with different sectors and making different reforms and policies, and of course setting targets and then coming out with this budget. How much of the room to make your own decisions in this current scenario exists, given the fact that we are bound by different conditionalities from the IMF?
You see, first of all, let's acknowledge that when a country is in IMF program, it is like an ICU, and it is not meant to be a permanent place where, or a patient has to go again and again. This is an emergency treatment. And while you are there, of course, you have to observe all the protocols, which in this case IMF is prescribing. But then if you go, one level deeper, for instance, the tax revenue targets, and how it is to be achieved. So for instance, we know that, okay, IMF prescribes certain tax revenue targets because there is a given level, a given size of the government, the public expenditure, political economy does not allow to cut significantly development spending. And I agree with Farooq that there are a lot of inefficiencies in how development spending works. But then the political economy, the elected government want to spend more money in development. And so in that case, budget deficit may rise, and the IMF would say, okay, we need to now bring more tax revenue or non-tax revenue for that matter to maintain the budget deficit, let's say less than 4%. Now, the next is the government will. How to achieve that number is not in IMF domain. Government can very well increase the tax rates on certain goods, certain products, certain income segments, or tinker with the income slabs, tinker with tariff rates. These level of decisions are taken by the government itself. There are benchmarks set by the IMF, let's say the primary surplus, but then how to maneuver within the tax policy is very much in the hands of the government. It is very much in the control of the government, or for instance, provincial governments, of how they would want to control their finances. Tax revenue mobilization efforts, they're not barred by IMF not to undertake those efforts, but unfortunately, the structure of the NFC award is such that they are not incentivized to make those efforts, bringing a lot of burden on the federal government. So we have a situation where the federal government is always in a deficit and provincial governments are always in surplus. This is not the making of IMF. This is the making of our political structure, right? So while there are benchmarks, how to achieve is very much in the hand of the government. Similarly, IMF expects us to close down government enterprises, inefficient state-owned enterprises. But then which one should we prioritize? Should we take the difficult one, such as PIA first? Should we go for the easy first? This is still in the hands of the government. So you can find so many examples where we can actually achieve a lot under the program. But when sometimes, but that's a harder way. I must, also say there's a harder way to achieve that. So I think given the pressure and given how the bureaucracy works, let's say the chairman of FBR is there for a very short time and he has to achieve the target set by the prime minister in a short span of time. Then the revenue measures comes in and then, okay, we want to achieve, maybe the FBR decide, okay, let's collect some advance taxes, let's hold some refunds for some time so that a target is achieved. And then reform is sidelined and target achieved. And so that's the kind of complexity which the government faces. But I think to conclude, I would say that IMF may be setting the higher benchmarks. It is not in the driving seat of the policy, which is where the government has autonomous positions.
Right. Dr. Saab, I'm glad that you're talking about IMF and then, of course, the nature of policy making in Pakistan also. One thing that really raised alarm in at least my eye, and there was this report that water supply for Kharif crops was low, lesser than usual. And that is before actually India started playing, this dice with the Indus Waters Treaty. On one side, that is a concern because agriculture is our lifeline. On the other side, we have been provided with these funds by the World Bank regarding climate change also. And we have to actually focus on those things too. But how do you reconcile the reality of having an upper riparian country hostile to Pakistan that is actually hoping that one day we all die of thirst? On the other side, the world providing us with funds, But without water, how are you going to actually go for climate mitigation?
And Dr. Ali, knowing the facts that since almost more than 3 years, India hasn't been providing us with any of the records of whether they have stopped water towards Pakistan or not.
3 years, 10 years.
There was some distortion.
Right, Dr. Ali, I don't know if you were able to hear the question properly, but Faisal, perhaps you can repeat yours.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Ali, did you understand my question?
Unfortunately, I don't think we can hear from Dr. Ali anymore. But thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for joining us and being a part of this discussion. And this is an important point that both of you have raised, of course, in integral to the ways that we're looking forward to how things go ahead, and of course the ways that it's going to impact the economy. Farooq, I want your take up first on that, since you posed the question.
Right. Regarding, reconciling the two, I don't know. I hope nobody gets the kind of neighbor that India is, right? And I wouldn't wish it on even Indians, right? The kind of pleasure they get from our suffering, right? On one side, they want to, force us to die of thirst, and hunger also, because agriculture is agriculture, water is very important. On the other side, they tried everything, did their best to detail our IMF program. Our finance minister was saying they tried to actually cancel the meeting that was going to approve the tranche. And then after that, what happened, Sana? When there was board meeting and after that there was protest briefing, they took on a caller from India, and she is complaining about IMF actually allowing money to Pakistan. With that kind of mental people next door, it becomes very difficult to make policies. I must salute everybody in Pakistan who is making policy at this moment, because they are wrangling with some horrid kind of animosity. But even then, I hope in coming days, there's going to be some sanity that prevails. By the way, let me also tell you one thing.
Yeah.
They are so angry that Pakistan shot down their planes, that they actually are betraying Pakistan Army and Pakistan Armed Forces. And then just an hour ago, DW, somebody from Indian, influenced circle, actually created a hit job of a documentary report on Pakistan Army, just because the budget is coming. At a time when you have a prime minister who tried to invade another country just for the sake of optics. Pakistan Army, Pakistan civil military relationship shouldn't be a concern for the world at all, because 1.45 billion people are hostage to a madman and a mad polity that wants to destroy everybody in the region, right? With that kind of mentality, I think and I hope in coming days, at least the world realizes what kind of madness there is, and they protest India rather than playing ball or succumbing to Indian protest. Because at this moment, it is about human rights as well as the sanity of 1.45 billion people.
And Sanab, I just wanted to mention here that I think DW, rather than making any other documentaries, I think they should focus on one documentary, as they themselves are victims of Nazis. They should be making a documentary on similarities between Nazis and Hindutva ideology, RSS, which is actually running today's India. I think that would sell like anything.
All right. Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Farooq, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And of course, we'll be here to speak about the budget. Till then, it's goodbye. That's all that we have from the show today. We'll now see you tomorrow.